Today, we're diving into the microscopic world to talk about an intestinal organism that lives inside millions and millions of people. It is incredibly common, but you've probably never even heard its name. Chilomastix mesnili.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. According to pretty much all medical consensus, it doesn't actually make you sick. It's a harmless passenger. So that begs the question, right? If it's totally harmless, why on earth are we dedicating an entire explainer to it? Well, as it turns out, this tiny creature has a huge story to tell.
All right, so let's get right into it. To really understand why this parasite matters, we first need to figure out what Chilomastix mesnili actually is. So what are we dealing with here? It's a protozoan, which just means it's a single-celled organism. So think microscopic animal, not a multicellular worm. The most important word on this slide is non-pathogenic. That's the scientific way of saying it's a commensal. Basically, a harmless little hitchhiker that lives in our pollen, rent-free, without causing any trouble. And when you look at where it sits in the grand tree of life, it gets pretty wild. It's part of a group called Metamonidae. This is a really ancient line of organisms, and many of them don't have the typical mitochondria, the little powerhouses that our own cells use for energy. Looking at it gives us a peek back into the very early days of complex life on Earth. Okay, so how does this thing actually survive and get from person to person? Well, like any successful parasite, it's got a pretty clever life cycle that involves two distinct forms. The life cycle is actually remarkably simple and direct. There's no middleman like a mosquito or a snail. It all starts when a person swallows the infective cyst form, usually through contaminated food or water. That tough little cyst travels to the intestine where it hatches and releases the active form. Then, new cysts are created, passed out in feces, and the whole cycle is ready to start again. So it's kind of like a secret agent with two different disguises. First, there's the trophozoite. This is the active, feeding, multiplying stage. It's pear-shaped and zips around with this unique, jerky, spiraling motion inside your colon. But to survive the harsh outside world, it morphs into the cyst. Think of the cyst as its armored escape pod. It's smaller, lemon-shaped, can't move, and it's built like a tiny tank, making it the perfect vehicle for transmission. All right, so we've got a harmless organism with a simple life cycle. Let's get back to that central question. Why does it matter? This is where the story really gets interesting. The answer really comes down to where you find it. Take a look at this. In the US, where sanitation is generally very good, the infection rate is low, around 3.5%. But in a study of a rural community in Indonesia, that rate doubled to 7%. And trust me, that is not a coincidence. Its presence is directly and powerfully linked to the fecal contamination of food and water. And this right here, this is the absolute key to the whole story. Finding Chilomastix mesnili in a person's sample is like a detective finding a muddy footprint at a crime scene. The footprint itself didn't do the harm, but it is undeniable proof that an intruder got in. This parasite is biological proof that a person has consumed something contaminated with human or animal waste. It's a giant red flag that the door was wide open for other, truly dangerous pathogens to get in at the same time. You can see this idea in action when you look at places like the Netherlands. Because of their incredibly high sanitation standards, local transmission is almost unheard of. So when doctors there find it, it's nearly always in someone who has recently traveled from or moved from a region where contamination is more common. It basically becomes a geographical marker. So this brings us to a really fascinating dilemma in the medical world. A lab report comes back positive for Chilomastix mesnili. What does a doctor do next? To treat or not to treat? First off, how do they even spot this thing? Well, you can forget about any fancy blood or antigen tests because it doesn't invade our body's tissues. The diagnosis is pure old-school lab work. It takes a skilled technician peering through a microscope at a stool sample to spot those distinctive pear-shaped or lemon-shaped forms. And very often, it's found completely by accident when they're really looking for something else. And what happens next leads to a real debate. In many places, the approach is, if a patient has symptoms, and this is the only thing the lab finds, a doctor might go ahead and prescribe a drug like metronidazole just to be safe. But the Dutch perspective is totally different. They argue that since it's harmless, you shouldn't treat it. Instead, you should see it as a clue that you need to search harder for the real cause of the symptoms. It's a fascinating philosophy that helps avoid the overuse of antibiotics. But wait, the story isn't over yet. Science never stands still, and thanks to modern genetic tools, our understanding of this supposedly simple organism is getting a lot more complex. Get this. For the longest time, we thought Chilomastix mesnili was just, well, one thing. But new genetic studies have revealed there are at least 3 distinct subtypes. One of them is found in both humans and other primates, suggesting it can jump between species. Another seems to be mostly a human-specific strain, and a third one is linked directly to pigs. This is a game changer for understanding where an infection could be coming from. And maybe the biggest shift in thinking is this. We're moving away from simply calling it harmless and starting to see it as an indicator of dysbiosis. That's the term for an imbalance in your gut's ecosystem, the trillions of good bacteria that help keep you healthy. Its presence might just be a sign that the gut's normal, healthy environment has been disrupted, allowing this quiet hitchhiker a chance to thrive. So let's boil it all down. What's the takeaway here? First, Chilomastix mesnili is, by itself, a harmless hitchhiker. It doesn't make you sick. Second, and this is the big one, it is a critical clue. Its presence is a flashing neon sign pointing to exposure to fecal contamination. And third, it's now emerging as a potential indicator of our overall gut health, a little warning light for an imbalanced microbiome. All the information in this explainer was put together using a Gemini deep search. If you want to go deeper into the research, you can find a detailed list of all our sources in the Notebook LM document linked below. And all of this leaves us with one final big picture thought. The story of Chilomastix mesnili shows us that sometimes the things we're tempted to ignore as unimportant are actually sending the most crucial signals. It makes you wonder, what other harmless things in our world are really trying to tell us a much, much bigger story? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden stories of our world, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more explainers just like this one. And we'd love to know what you think, so please leave your feedback in the comments. Thanks so much for watching.